In this tutorial, you will learn how to use the pulseIn Arduino function to measure the duration of a pulse. So 2 steps here. First, I'm going to show you exactly what is a pulse and then how to use the pulseIn using an example with a push button. So first of all, what is a pulse? Okay, because pulseIn will measure a pulse, so let's first understand what is a pulse. So here you have a signal that is going on a digital pin, and the signal is first low, so let's say 0 volt, okay? And then the signal is going to high, for example, when you press on a push button, or if you receive a signal from any other component. So it stays high for a while, and then it goes back to low. So this right there is a pulse, and this is a pulse that we are going to call a pulse in high mode, okay, because this is a pulse going from low to high. And you have also a different kind of pulse, which is a pulse that goes from high to low. Okay, let's imagine the signal is high by default, and then going to low, and then staying low for a while, and then going back to high. So the pulse here would be the pulse when the signal is going to low. Alright, so this right there is the pulse. Now, what we want to do with pulseIn is to measure this duration here. This can be super useful, for example, with a push button. If we want to do a certain action, if we have pressed the push button enough time, or have a parameter that is proportional to this pulse duration. Or another example is an ultrasonic sensor where you can detect a distance and the distance is directly proportional to the pulse duration. So how to measure this? Well, we're going to call pulseIn, and here are the different steps of the pulseIn function. First, we call the function. So the signal is low, we call the pulseIn function, and then it will wait, okay? It will wait as long as the signal is low. So if we use the function with the high mode, okay, it will wait as long as the signal is low, and then when the signal is high, it will start measuring, okay, the duration, so starting at 0 here, and when the signal goes to low, it will stop measuring, make the difference, and return the pulse duration. And if you have a pulse that is in a low mode, then that's going to be the same, but it's going to measure the pulse when the signal is going too low. So to measure the pulse, first we're going to create a small circuit with just a push button, and I have added a pull-down resistor to the push button, so the signal will be low by default, and when we press on the push button, the signal will go to high, so we can use the pulseIn function with the high mode. So on the circuit you can see we have one leg of the push button which is connected to a ground via a 10 kilo ohm resistor. Then on the other side of the push button, I connect a wire, so the right wire, to 5 volt. And then yet with another leg that is on the same side as the pull-down resistor, I have added a connection to digital pin number 2. So with digital pin number 2, we are going to be able to read the state from the push button. And note here that I haven't added a hardware debounce mechanism, and I will not do neither the software debounce, okay? Just to keep the circuit and the code simple so we can focus 100% on the pulseIn function. And let's now go to the Arduino IDE to write the code. So what we want to achieve here, the result we want to get, is the duration of basically how long do we press on the push button. So first I am going to initialize the push button, so create a define for the button pin. And this is pin number 2, so I don't need to write 2 anymore in the program, I can just use button pin. And then in the void setup I am going to do pin mode button pin with input. Okay, because this is a push button, I can choose input or output. As we want to read some data, I choose input. And then in the void loop, I'm going to call the pulseIn function. So I'm going to do unsigned long duration, okay, because the pulseIn function will return the duration of the pulse in microseconds, and it will be an unsigned long, okay? A duration is always positive, So we have unsigned, and then unsigned long, so we can have a pretty big number in microseconds. So pulse in, okay, with I uppercase, it should turn orange. And then you can give 2 or 3 parameters. The first parameter is the button pin, so the pin number. The second parameter is the mode for the pulse-in function, so either low or high. Here we choose high because we have a pull-down resistor on the push button, so the signal is low by default, and we want to measure the pulse when it's going to high. If you had put, for example, a pull-up resistor, you would have to choose low mode. And then you can add if you want a timeout or not. So the timeout is basically how long does the pulse-in function wait before the pulse starts. And the default timeout is 1 second. So for this specific example, I'm going to put a timeout here of 10 million, okay, because here the parameter is in microseconds. Okay, so 10 million will make 10 seconds. So instead of the default 1 second timeout, I add a 10 seconds. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later to explain more things about it. So this basically, it will just call pulse in and then wait up to 10 seconds to start detecting a pulse. If it detects a pulse, it will read the duration of the pulse. If it doesn't detect a pulse after 10 seconds, it will just return 0, okay? And so when I get the duration, I can simply do serial. So I'm going to print with serial.begin here, 9600. Okay, let's keep a standard baud rate here and serial.println with duration. All right, and now let's upload the code to the Arduino. And I'm going to open the serial monitor. So we have nothing for now. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to press on the button and keep it for a few seconds. Okay, and then I release it and you can see we have a first value. I'm going to do it a second time a little bit faster. So faster, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds approximately. Okay. So as you can see here, we have, so if you take six numbers to make a million, we have 3.5 seconds. For the next run, we have just 0.1 second. And then we have 4 seconds and 4.2 seconds, okay? Or 4 million microseconds. And then you can see from time to time we have some zeros, okay, that appear because we have reached the timeout for the pulse-in function. So great, we have been able to get the duration of how long we have pressed on the push button. Now a few remarks and best practices here, so you correctly use the pulse-in functionality. First, if you are waiting for a pulse that is quite long, okay, here you could see that I have a pulse that is maybe 3 or 4 seconds, or maybe more, then the pulse-in will block the program, okay? And that may be a problem. So what you could do as an improvement is to use interrupts. I'm not going to do that here, but that could be an improvement to use interrupts to monitor the time when the pulse starts and monitor the time when the pulse ends. And actually, I have released the complete Arduino course in which I explain in detail the pulse-in and how to use interrupts to make it a non-blocking functionality. So you can check the link in the description if you're interested. And then another best practice for the pulse-in function is, so here I just use it in the loop like this. But best practice is to use it when you know you are going to need it. So if you are able to know, for example, let's say the pulse-in will start in less than 10 milliseconds, then you can start the pulse-in right now instead of blocking for a huge amount of time. An example of this is when you read the distance from an ultrasonic sensor. So you have 2 steps. First, you trigger a pin, and then once you have triggered a pin, you know that you are going to receive a pulse very soon. So in that case, you can call the pulse-in function. And then you can just play with the timeout. So if you are waiting for longer pins and you don't care about blocking the program too much, you can increase the timeout like we did here, or you can keep it with the default value by just removing the parameter, so that will be 1 second. Okay, so you can tinker the timeout depending on your application and depending on your circuit, so you will have to make experiment actually to know what is the best timeout for the pulseIn function. And as a quick recap for this tutorial, as you can see, using pulseIn is very simple. You just use the pulseIn function like this with the pin, the mode, the timeout, and it will return the duration inside an unsigned long variable in microseconds. So you first need, of course, to initialize the pin, okay, that you are going to use to input mode. And then that's pretty much it. If you liked this video, subscribe to get more tutorials like this in the future. Also, check out my online courses so you can learn Arduino step by step in an efficient way by practicing and directly going to the point. Links in the description. Alright, thank you for watching. See you in the next tutorial or in one of my courses.